and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 115, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, this is a show where we bring out a new episode every single Friday, and happy Good Friday if you are celebrating today. And we just talk about classic video games that have helped shape our lives, classic systems, consoles, computers. The thing about it is, at the moment, they seem to be coming back again.
Oh, they're coming back in force, but they're coming back small, aren't they?
Well, they are. Everything's got miniaturised recently.
Yeah, a lot of mini systems coming through. We've got the mini NES, the mini SNES. Oh, God, the C64 Mini.
Just came out.
Do you think they'd have a Game Boy Mini? That would be tiny, wouldn't it?
Play it with cocktail sticks.
Yeah.
And the big news, of course, over the last week, you may have seen this, even like the Metro and stuff like that. We've known about this for a while, and it's not a product that's without its controversy. We'll talk a bit more about Atari's return in the next few minutes.
Atari are back, and they've been back a few times, haven't they, actually? But we hope this is the final kind of really good back, but we'll see.
Well, it's crazy, though, that all these companies and products are making a comeback. What I think it proves is that retro gaming just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
And these brands kind of stay in people's mind. You know, once you've played that game when you were a kid and you've kind of spent that much time on it, there's a part of your brain that's dedicated to Atari or something, you know. So it really is relevant.
The fanboyism never goes away.
Yeah, totally.
Well, you know what is insane is we keep getting approached by like mainstream media as well. Like just today, there's been a new article come out about us that's featured in our local magazine, local newspaper here in Nottingham, the Nottingham Post.
Oh, yeah, and that's by Paul Jury as well, who's a wicked journalist from Retro Gamer.
We're talking, an evening newspaper here that's like read by your auntie and uncle and stuff like that who are interested in retro video games. That's how mainstream it's becoming now, so it is pretty crazy. And one thing I love about doing this show as well is that we get to speak to our heroes every single week. Now, the way the show works, if you are new to it, we're going to go through the retro gaming news stories in the next few minutes. And then, normally around 20, 25 minutes into the show, we welcome on an industry veteran. And this week, I'm actually so excited about talking to this gentleman we've got on this week, because he was the co-founder of a company that pretty much shaped my childhood.
Magnetic Fields?
And before that, Mr. Chip Software.
Mr. Chips, was that the guy from Catchphrase?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any crossover there, I'm not sure. But this week we've got Andrew Morris. Now, he founded Magnetic Fields, formerly Mr. Chip Software, in 1982 with Sean Southern, who was a legendary coder.
Oh, legendary, definitely.
And I got introduced to them because I had a Commodore 16 plus 4 was like my first machine that was a bit of an underdog, but actually they released some really good games on that platform.
Well, all their games kind of pushed it to the limits.
Yeah.
You know, that was the whole thing about Magnetic Fields. They had, like, Lotus games, and they were unbelievably fast, and you could do split-screen racing on them. And Kid Chaos, if you ever saw that, that was, like, Amiga's attempt at Sonic.
Yeah, I love that game.
It ran as fast as Sonic. It was very impressive.
But you mentioned Lotus there, and I think, in terms of historical kind of famous racing games, they were like the biggest series back in the early 90s, weren't they? Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, Lotus 2, Lotus 3.
Yeah, well, the fact that it was sponsored by Lotus, and, they had amazing music. The music was like just thumping beat, and you'd kind of get right pace with Lotus, wouldn't you? It would be on par with Outrun.
Well, I think, that's one thing we're going to ask Andrew about, because Lotus 2 was much more like an arcade kind of game, wasn't it? The first one had like pit stops and you had to refuel and all that. The second one was like pure arcade action. And like you said, it had that Barry Leach kind of yellow sampling soundtrack that was like, everyone remembers that. So I can't wait to get the story of Magnetic Fields and Mr. Chip Software. We're talking, games like the Lotus series, Supercars as well. That was incredible. Trailblazer, Rally Championship, pretty much from the, earliest 8-bit systems, 1982 to 1999. And then I want to find out what happened to them, because they kind of just faded away and haven't released anything for like 20 years. So Andrew Morris is going to be our special guest on the Retro Hour podcast in around 20 minutes from now. Now, what I do love about the fact that we're recording this show on like a Tuesday evening at 7:30 is the fact that it is technically British summertime now.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it, would you?
Even though it's raining, it is light outside finally. So that does mean that summer isn't too far away. And we've got a packed summer this year with events. How many events are we doing?
Oh, God, we're doing so many events. How many panels did we work out? I think it was over 19.
It was 19 until we added 2 more events that we're doing now that we will be talking about.
We haven't announced them all, but this is a crazy year for the Retro Hour. You can pretty much see us anywhere in the UK.
Yeah.
And also you may be able to see us in Ireland soon as well.
We'll talk more about that next week, but that's exciting news.
But the latest thing coming up is with DJ Yoda.
Now, DJ Yoda is one of my all-time favourite DJs. Do you remember the how cut and paste CDs in the early 2000s.
And he won the DMC and the Scratch DJ Awards, and he's on Aphrodite's label, Aphrodite Recordings. Now, Aphrodite did some justice, and some of the original kind of drum and bass tunes that were all made on the Amiga.
Yeah.
So DJ Yoda's doing the history of video games, which is at Nottingham Contemporary on the 27th of April. Well, I've managed to get it so that I'm going to be supporting DJ Yoda on 2 old school Amigas.
Now, if you've never seen Ravi DJ before, I mean, you've done a few Facebook live streams, haven't you?
Yeah, I'll probably be doing one before the event, actually.
You can practice.
Yeah. The practice set.
Explain what your setup is then. What do you use?
So I use 2 Amigas, and they're using this software which was made by Akira and Hoffman.
Yeah.
And it's called PT1210. And this basically emulates a kind of record deck on the Amigas.
Well, the name technically is 1210, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. So you can use the old Pro Tracker modules in there, like loaded off disk. And it's really good because it's got time stretching. You know, you can change the beat on it, and you can take in and out instruments and loop certain things. So it's kind of like a little rave machine, but it's all these .mod tracks. Now, you all know about MP3, but .mod was one of the old 4-channel formats. And
back in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, and hardly anyone's heard those tunes, only Amiga crazy people. So I'm going to be playing these out in the public, and we'll see how they react.
Well, I think DJ Yoda, I remember I saw him live probably about 10 years ago at a festival, and I think he played like some really hardcore dark jungle and mixed it into Rick Astley Together Forever.
This is it. He's going to be mixing in old TV adverts and all of this kind of stuff. And, one of the quotes is like, he's one of the top 10 DJs to see before you die.
Yeah.
And that's what Q Magazine say, so...
And,
I don't know about the support.
I was going to say, and Ravi Abbott as well. Yeah. So you're going to be doing the warm-up slot then on this night, which it's a pretty big gig actually, mate. It's, it's pretty high profile,
and what I'm going to try and do is connect the Amigas up to the projectors, so we can have giant projectors of the output of what I'm doing on the trackers, so people can kind of see this mad Matrix tracker stuff and see all my mistakes, probably.
I'm sure there'll be none. So Ravi will be doing a few little live streams on our Facebook page. If you haven't given us a like, I mean, you got loads of viewers last time you did one. Was it like Christmas you did one, wasn't it?
It was huge, yeah.
Like a year ago.
I'm going to record all of this as well, and I'll be sharing it all over YouTube and stuff, but you can get tickets. We've got the link in the description, and it's through Fatsoma.
Yeah, and I think they're selling pretty quick, aren't they? So they've
already sold out the first 3 releases, so it's on the final release now.
Okay, cool. So if you want to get those, we'll put that in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our special interview this week with Andrew Morris, we want to say a massive, massive thank you to the people who support this show and put a little donation into our tip jar now. Obviously, we say if you want to make a little donation and help us into the running of the show, that's completely fine. That's really appreciated. If you don't, totally understand, it's up to you. But if you would like to make a donation, everything we get into our pot goes back into the running of the Retro Hour podcast. And we've made it dead easy. We've got a little PayPal link, or even if you're into cryptocurrency, you can do that as well. Now, all you got to do is nip onto our website. You'll find that on the front page of theretrohour.com. And just for making a donation of any amount, you'll earn your place in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Now, this week, we want to say thank you so much to Toby Philpott,
Michael Verdi,
Matthew Martin,
and Sikkim Accountancy and Risk Management BV.
No, that was a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
We often get with the company names like that. The person who, we've had a few of these, and Law's messages going, I thought it was from my personal account,
yeah.
which is for the business plug. But he sent us a really nice message on there as well, saying how, he loves listening to the show and memories it brings back to. So we do appreciate that. I didn't actually realise you can attach a note to PayPal payments as well. So
that's cool. Yeah, probably a load that we haven't read. So get on the backlog, Dan.
Go back to the last 2 years. Yeah. But thank you so much for your support, guys. It means a lot to us. And if you'd like to do the same, any donation, big or small, is really appreciated and helps us do this show every week for you. All you got to do is nip onto our website, theretrohour.com. Now let's talk about this Atari box then. Do you remember when we first saw the trailer? It was back end of last year?
Yeah, and they were saying that this is going to be an entire new console and it's going to play modern games as well and be able to compete with the modern systems. And it looked really nice.
Well, there was that kind of 3D animation teaser they released at first. It had the flyover. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's made out of plastic, but it's kind of got that kind of false wood grain kind of looks. It looks a bit like the original, Woody Atari 2600. Well, this week, apparently they were at GDC showing it off.
They weren't really at GDC, were they, though? Because this is the thing. I've seen news reports and everyone's saying they were there, but they're in a hotel room.
Okay.
They've hired a hotel room next to it and they've kind of put up a banner and a few Atari things and a cap and showing their device. Yeah, so you can't really say they're there. They're tagging onto the side of it.
They bought tickets for GDC, in other words. But there have been quite a lot of like publications that have picked up. I know, I look at these articles and I get the impression journalists are really trying to think of something to say about it.
Totally, because I read one the other day and the best thing someone said was that they could come out with an Atari cap. Okay. And like the whole place was just there because of the name Atari. There was nothing else that kind of attracted them.
A baseball cap?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, at least there are some nice new high-resolution photos. Now, I'm going to link up to an article here in Slash Gear. It's titled, Atari VCS, Here's What We Know So Far. Now, there is a picture there. I've got to say, the controller that appears to be with it, there is kind of one that looks like the old original one-button Atari joystick. But there is also one that looks a bit like kind of an Xbox 360 controller.
It's a weird one, isn't it, that? Because it's got a 360 one, but then it's got two thumbsticks, and is that a D-pad in there as well?
It looks like one. Well, that kind of goes with what we've heard about it's now called the Atari VCS. I've renamed it now, like the original console. It's no longer the Atari box. But apparently, even though they're at this hotel room in GDC, nobody saw it up and running. They didn't let anyone play on it. So I'm not even sure whether, that there are some pictures of it here, what looks like a hotel room, but that could be, that could just be a mock.
Well, it's weird because I was looking at these hotel room pictures and I saw in the corner Roller Coaster Tycoon Studio on the bottom photo. So I'm not sure if they did have something running or not.
Well, from what we know about it, there are some very scant kind of technical details that have been released. That apparently it's going to be an AMD x86 processor.
Okay.
Kind of comparable to a high-end PC laptop in terms of performance, they reckon. They reckon it's going to be able to do 4K. It will be able to play some PC games, but they haven't confirmed whether like Steam and GOG and that kind of stuff will be available on it yet. There will be some classic Atari games on there as well with a proprietary UI to access games.
Okay, so it might be like a system where you could just, install Windows and put Steam on it and then run other stuff, or there might be, it could have good potential for hacks. You could have a dual boot, couldn't you, or something like that.
But you know what it reminds me of? I'm thinking the Ouya straight away.
Oh, yeah, because there was a lot of hype with the Ouya and it really didn't live up to it. But, I don't know. I think it's strange that they've changed the name as well, because I thought Atari Box was quite a good name.
But I think they're obviously trying to trade on nostalgia here, aren't they, with it? The thing about it is, and I was watching a video by Review Tech USA the other day, who's a YouTuber I watched, and he kind of did a bit of a rant about this. And he mentioned quite an interesting fact that, they're probably trying to trade on the success of the SNES and NES Mini and all that kind of thing. But I'm not really, I agree with him in this video. I'm not really sure the nostalgia for Atari's franchises is big enough to warrant releasing them to a new market.
What, like the individual ones?
Yeah, like Millipede and stuff like that.
I don't know. I reckon if it was an arcade unit, a mini arcade that you could have all this stuff on, that would really appeal. But home.
It's like, you think of like Nintendo have got like Mario and Zelda and famous franchises. The stuff that was on Atari, they were great back in the day, but I must admit, and I might get a bit of flaming for this, I actually, even though I've got like kind of clones of old Atari consoles, I don't find a lot of interest in its library anymore. It doesn't really hold my attention.
Well, if they had stuff like the later libraries as well, so they had stuff like, Jaguar games and stuff like that, that could be interesting.
Although I doubt it from what I've seen. It could happen, but I think they're really trying to look at, the Atari VCS 2600.
But if we don't see them playing it, then how whatever's going to be on it, so...
But, and the prices I've heard quoted for it, that it's going to be about $350 to $399. And generally when you get kind of, especially with the pound being weaker these days, you generally find that's going to translate to pounds as well.
How much is the Xbox One? Can you get that for?
I saw one in CEX the other day. The white, slimmer Xbox One, they're selling that for £200.
Okay, so, yeah.
So I think new they're about $300, $350 now. So you're competing head-on with Sony and Microsoft. And that's not a good place to be.
No, maybe they should go for the smaller, just little machine, mini, cheap, I don't know.
That's the thing. But it's like, are you going to spend $350 to play that Missile Command? And, it's a bit of a tough
Well,
sell.
wait for one person to buy it and review it on eBay, on YouTube.
Well, what they really need to do, though, is kind of show this working there, because it's looking like vaporware at the minute from a lot of, reports I've seen. And, people are making comparisons to like the, Coleco Chameleon and stuff like that, which there's been so much of that in the retro industry over the last year. It's a bad trap to fall into.
Yeah, they could have spent some money on a stand.
If you want to come to any gaming shows here in the summer this year, in the UK, we're going to be at lots of them. Give us a shout. Maybe we can get that sorted out. So I hope it does succeed, because I'd love to see Atari making a comeback.
And it looks sexy.
It does.
To be honest.
I mean, if it was like 199 quid, I might get one, but 350. Unless it had like the performance of a high-end PC maybe, and had Steam and all that on maybe, but I think it's going to be a tough sell. But, we'll wait and see. Now, one of my all-time favourite games is making a comeback on my favourite console at the moment. Flashback is getting a physical edition celebrating its 25th anniversary on the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, well, this is the bonus of having my girlfriend moving. I can steal her Switch.
You haven't got it, have you?
Yeah.
Have you?
And installing all these kind of games. Like, Flashback was absolutely amazing. It was rotoscope graphics, wasn't it? Where they kind of trace around the person and then,
Well, they captured video, didn't they?
Yeah, they captured his video.
What was that, Prince of Persia before it? That was the same, wasn't it? Same kind of thing. But I loved that game, and it was kind of in the same vein as Another World as well. Those kind of two early 90s. They kind of felt like playing a movie a bit, didn't they?
But it was also incredibly popular. It was all over all systems. It was on, like, the Mega Drive, I remember that. And, it felt a bit Jurassic Parky to me. Right? It had that kind of, like, look.
In the forest and stuff like that at the beginning. But even later on, I mean, when I read about this the other day, because I remember it had that really like kind of smooth animation and the soundtrack was incredible. And I read this article like last weekend. I thought, I haven't played Flashback for ages. So I booted it up and had a little play. And I played it actually probably for about 2 hours and I got quite into it. The later levels are kind of a bit like Blade Runner kind of levels.
Well, there's loads of little bits. Do you have to like throw stones in it? I remember.
The beginning you do,
because that was... In Metal Gear Solid later on, you had a whole kind of stone distraction thing. And I was like, flashback stones, yeah.
And you have to get the guards to, like, come through doors and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really strategic, isn't it?
And even at the end, I think you're on, like, some alien planet and there's kind of, like, things that look a bit like the Blob that come along and get you, like, great animation. And it was a game that, really captured my attention as a kid. And apparently it was quite inspired by Total Recall, the movie.
A lot of wicked film.
Inspired in there. So what they're actually doing is, now, they're calling it the 25th anniversary because it was, the SNES version came out in 1993. I think the Amiga version was the year before. So they can call it 25 years because it's actually the SNES version they've bundled in here as well. But there are apparently some kind of upgrades to it too. They've got like a modern mode, they're calling, with like some stuff like a tutorial in there as well. I've been able to rewind your mistakes if you make them, a few little things that might make it a bit more accessible.
Like save states and stuff like that.
So where in the original game, you get like little save machines that you kind of walk up to. But Flashback it's a brutal game.
Yeah, really challenging. It's not a platformer that you can just kind of bomb it through,
But it's one life, isn't it? If you die, then you come back. But they did actually do like a modern kind of HD update to Flashback about 4 or 5 years ago. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think so, because I actually had for the Wii U.
Okay.
I had a version of Flashback. Yeah.
I got it on 360. And I bought that without reading any of the reviews. I played it for about 2 minutes. I was like, this is pants. I couldn't play any of it. And the reviews were terrible. It got like 1 star and everything. But what I like about this is, I mean, it's a dangerous thing, messing with nostalgia, as we know. But I think the way they're doing this is really good. You can either play the original version as it was on your Switch, or they give you a few modern creature comforts.
Yeah, that's what I like. I like 2 modes. Like, in Sonic Generations, you had 2 modes where you could go old school or new school. And it's like, if you really don't like the new school, just stick with the old one.
Yeah, it gives you the option.
And it means you haven't wrecked the original game.
What was that, Monkey Island? They did the SE releases of that, didn't they? And you could either go back to old graphics or play the new one. But, I mean, I love the fact they're giving this a physical release as well. And it looks like it comes with, like, some really cool kind of add-ons in there as well, including some it looks a bit like a SNES cartridge, weirdly enough. So we'll keep an eye out for that. It's not out till June, but if you want to get your pre-orders and stuff, that'll be a day one purchase for me. We'll link you up in the show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, story we didn't really cover all that much because it was kind of breaking, a couple of weeks before we did shows and stuff recently. But this weekend will mark the final weekend of Toys R Us in many regions.
Well, it's awful, actually. We've had a massacre of kind of shops recently. It's, what was it? Woolworths was the first to go, and we've had Maplin's recently, and now Toys R Us.
Well, if I play this, how much nostalgia comes back to you just from hearing this?
There's a magical place, we're on our way there, with toys in the
Tons, especially my dad saying, "You're not going."
No good memories then. But it just reminds me, Christmas time as a kid when this would come on TV.
Yeah, I remember it, and it was kind of like a dream world that I was never allowed to go to, because if you go into Toys R Us, you would spend a lot of money, wouldn't you?
Yeah, your parents' money.
Yeah.
It's called Toys R Us, Toys R Us, Toys R Us.
You know, I did see an article the other day, a little post actually on Twitter, someone go, what's going to happen to Jeffrey now? And images would be like homeless and stuff. Poor Jeffrey. But, you know, Toys R Us, it was, as a kid. Because the thing is, I've seen all this outburst recently, people going, oh, it's an outrage, it's going. And there is actually a really good post here in the Miami Herald, of all places, talking about the fact that nostalgia has triggered grief at the closure of Toys R Us.
Well, I don't know. It's weird for me because Toys R Us seemed very American, and especially when you were watching stuff like Home Alone and, you know, when he's trapped in those big American toy stores. We didn't have those before. We had like BTs and stuff like that, but that was more hobbies and toys. But these giant American toy warehouses, that's when they kind of arrived. So, yeah, it's a bit weird because I wasn't really that much of a fan of Toys R Us. I was just like, it's a horrible looking building full of toys, you know.
Well, it was a warehouse, essentially, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You go in. But I do remember, you know, for video games, it was actually pretty good.
Well, you might get a bargain then, because they're closing down, aren't they, now? So it'll be sales everywhere.
I imagine, well, I think there's like a couple of days left at the time of recording this. A lot of them are closing this weekend, I think, the Easter weekend. But I imagine the shelves are probably all bare now if there's any sales on, if I'm honest. But they do make an interesting point here that when was the last time you went to Toys R Us?
Oh, God, to buy a Tamagotchi, that was it.
What, 1995 or something?
Yeah.
I think I bought a bike from there when I was at university. So it was like the nearest place to my uni in Lincoln. But
I thought you meant a kid's bike.
They did adult bikes as well. But people are saying here the reason that everyone's getting upset about the closure of Toys R Us, even though the fact that they're blatantly closing down because they haven't got enough customers, everyone goes to like Asda or Walmart or Amazon.
Online, yeah.
Yeah, Amazon has been their biggest competitor.
Well, Smithy's Toys as well in the UK, that's quite big.
Well, they're saying here, though, the reason that everyone's getting upset is because it kind of feels like a part of your childhood's died.
Yeah, I think it's all associated with, it's all wound in with those American kind of consumerist films that we got. And, you know, that kind of idea of, oh, it's Christmas, going to get millions of presents and all of this. And
well, it's even here in the advert, that advert we played then. For me, I remember sitting there, even though, again, like you said, then we didn't actually go to Toys R Us all that much. It'd more be like sitting there with the Argos catalogue circling the Toys R Us.
Yeah, dreaming about it.
but like for me, that was as much, the advert and that music. So brought it back, didn't they, a few years ago? That was a part of Christmas, like the holidays are coming Coca-Cola advert music was.
Yeah, totally.
And not hearing that now, it's like kind of, it does feel like a bit your childhood's gone, even though no one's been in the shops for like how many years. It's like... So it's like
it's exactly the same with Maplins as well.
Yeah, it was, yeah. People want these things to be on the high street, but they don't necessarily want to use them.
They just want it there for when they've got an emergency.
Yeah. You don't know what you got till it's gone, I think was the old song, wasn't it? So, goodbye Toys R Us, you will be missed. And of course we did have sad news that Charles Lazarus, who founded Toys R Us, passed away last week.
Yeah,
as well.
I saw that. That was all over the news as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, a bit sad that, he kind of got to see his company fold as well. But... he was 94 years old, had a good innings, didn't he?
Yeah.
So, and obviously founded one of the most legendary companies. So thank you, Charles, and thank you, Toys R Us.
Well, it's strange, all the kind of toys and connections with video games, Chuck E. Cheese and Nolan Bushnell and all that.
That's been quite a big crossover, I guess, isn't there?
Yeah, Tom Kalinske and He-Man.
That might be an episode one time, or a video for you, Ravi, because I know your YouTube channel's back on track again recently.
Yeah, I'm doing one a week. Can you believe it?
I saw you cleaning a keyboard the other day for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, people love those cleaning videos, just getting rid of dirt. It's like something satisfying. Have you ever watched videos of people jet washing cobbles or, paving slabs?
Who was it?
Oh my God, that's so good.
Is it like Retro Man Cave used to do quite a few no, it's not. I'm thinking 8-Bit Guy. He used to do some way to spray stuff with a hose and that, didn't he? Cleaning stuff in his garden. I know what you mean, though. I do like the satisfaction of seeing something like trash to treasure kind of stuff, isn't it? I did mention Retro Man Cave there because he's our guest next week on the podcast. So if you're a fan, definitely hang around for that. Now, before we get into this week's guest, Andrew Morris, one of your all-time favourite games, is also celebrating its 25th anniversary with Flashback, Simon the Sorcerer.
Oh, Simon the Sorcerer. Now, Simon the Sorcerer is fantastic. I don't know if J.K. Rowling basically played Simon the Sorcerer before she did Harry Potter, but it's very similar. And it's kind of a boy wizard, really good game that came out for the Amiga, and they had a PC version which later came, which was Simon 2, and then that kind of later got a release on the Amiga. But the best thing for me was it was a massive Red Dwarf fan.
Yeah.
And it had Chris Barry doing the kind of voice for it. So it's hilarious, having Rimmer as the voice of Simon the Sorcerer.
Yeah, there was like a talky release of it, wasn't there?
And it was beautiful. The art on it was so well drawn. Adventuresoft did it. And, the colours and the graphics were amazing, but so was the storyline. It was one of these old-style point and clicks.
It was around the same time as, Broken Sword was at Monkey Island, and Monkey Island 2, I think, was around then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But they were incredibly captivating games. Especially then, I think they were just full of charm as well, weren't they? And as a kid, you'd really get your imagination flowing.
Yeah, the humour in it was hilarious. I remember there was this whole thing about woodworms and them being racist against balsa wood or oak wood. It was great.
Well, what is crazy is the fact that, this is 25 years old now. So many of our favourite games are celebrating their anniversaries at the moment, aren't they? So they're getting re-releases. Well, there's going to be a special anniversary edition of Sam and the Sorcerer 1 and 2. So it's both games, Sam Sorcerer 1 and 2, coming out on the 3rd of April. They're going to be releasing this on Steam and GOG. And they've kind of done new, again, like the flashback release, kind of tweaked it a bit so modern audiences can get their head around it a little bit better. So apparently it's going to have new gameplay controls that they've kind of built from the ground up. Before you had to kind of hunt for pixels and stuff. Apparently it's going to be more hotspot based on the screen.
Okay.
And they're updating some of the animations and stuff too. They're going to have right-click quick actions in there as well. Easy ways to save your games. There's also going to be a new HD graphics mode that upscales it to 1080p as well.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the graphics at the moment, and actually it looks like with the HD stuff, they kind of do this thing where they remove all the pixels, but they just put a blurred smear
anti-aliasing kind of thing.
Yeah, and it just doesn't look right to me.
Well, you can play with the original music, and original graphics
good.
and all that if you want. So even the original controls, again, it's
original speed as well. Because my God, Simon walking across the map that could take a day. You could have a cup of tea, a meal, walk the dog, and he'd be on the other side.
We had a lot more patience back then, didn't we? I was the same playing Monkey Island. Do you remember? Monkey Island when you'd walk out the village and you got the map of everywhere.
Yeah,
you got the different places. On that, clicking that, it'd take him 4 or 5 minutes to walk across it. Sometimes, if you found the right place and double-clicked it, you'd run. But yeah, it's obviously we had nothing else to do back in the day, but it is a bit of a tough choice. You can either have the full-on modern version, or you can play it like you used to if you've got a spare weekend.
Play it old school.
But I wonder what's going to come next. So many games are celebrating anniversaries at the moment, so it would be quite interesting. If you guys have got some favourite games you think should make a comeback, maybe we can track down the original creators and suggest it.
How about Rise of the Robots, 25th edition?
I actually dare a developer to try track down Rise of the Robots source code and re-release that. It could finally get vindicated. They could make it good.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So, if anyone's...
Good mode or old mode.
If anyone's up to the challenge, do get in touch. show@theretrohour.com if you ever want to say hello to us. And, of course, you can tweet us at RetroHourUK. We're on Instagram, been posting on there quite a bit this week too. Facebook.
Discord as well. We're all over the place.
Yeah, and that's growing massively. Loads of people in there all hours of the day, I see.
Yeah, I go on it and I look 1 minute and then I'm 42 messages. Oh, my God.
I see my phone light up at 3 in the morning sometimes if I haven't put it on Do Not Disturb.
Yeah, actually, I left it in the bedroom the other day and it was going mental with Discord at night, and my girlfriend was like, turn that phone off.
So, if you do go on, it might be an idea just to mute notifications for it. It does get quite busy. But we'd love you to join us in there and get all the links on the website, theretrohour.com. But that's been this week's news, and now let's get into this week's special guest, talking about classic games like Lotus, Kikstart, Kid Chaos, the story of magnetic fields. This week's special guest is Andrew Morris. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and let's welcome on this week's very special guest. Thank you for joining us, Andrew Morris. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Now, we're going to get some stories from, classic games that we remember playing, like the Lotus games, Kid Chaos. Kikstart was one of my all-time favourites as well. But it might be quite nice just to get a little bit of background on you, Andrew. I mean, where did you first start with computers and gaming? Do you remember your earliest kind of memory?
It was the ZX81, so I'd have been about 10, I think, and someone at school bought one, and then I got one soon after, and basically learnt programming on that and the basics of computing. And then graduated to a Spectrum and a Commodore 64, and then eventually over to the Amiga.
Well, what kind of games were you into when you were really young, when you first started?
Well, in the very early days, or the ZX81, it was less about games and more about the programming and just playing around with the thing. Probably on the Spectrum, it was probably mine. Obviously, the Commodore 64 had a lot of great games Paradroid and all sorts of stuff in the Commodore 64. So yeah, I used to like racing games and platform games. That they were probably what I enjoyed the most.
Well, how did you and Sean Southern meet?
Well, I left school wanting to get into computer games, and there was a local company who were called Mr. Chip Software, and Sean worked with them. So on a YTS scheme, I joined Mr. Chip and met Sean there, and then we quickly started working together. I originally started as a programmer, wasn't very good at programming. I didn't particularly enjoy it and preferred the design and graphics element. So Sean and I started working together as games became a bit more professional, and it took two people to design them. And then we moved from there to magnetic fields. So yeah, we worked together probably for about the best part of 15 years.
Well, which games were you working on when you first joined Mr. Chip then? Do you remember like the early titles you worked on?
Oh, there was loads, lots of budget games, things like Roll Around. Kikstart 2 was the first full game I had a big design influence on and designed all the graphics for. But I was doing lots of loading screens and character sets and random characters and little bits and pieces that were needed for various games. So it was primarily all the budget games that Mr. Chip were doing there, and there was a lot of them. I remember we catered for the Commodore 16, C16, and the 64, and I think at one time we had the whole top 10 C16 games were Mr. Chip games. So there was a lot happening. We had quite a few programmers, and a lot of them weren't very good at graphics. So I was doing all sorts of things for all of the games that we were putting out at the time.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Commodore 16 because that was when I first got introduced, to, you and Sean's games. It was, I had a Commodore Plus 4, that was my first machine. And it doesn't surprise me you had the top 10 because, good software on the Commodore 16 and Plus 4 was a bit few and far between at that time.
Yeah.
But you guys did some amazing stuff on there. I remember like Bandits at Zero, Trailblazer, I think the first version of that was on the Commodore 16, wasn't it?
Let me think. I think we did it on the Commodore 64 first, and then there was a C16 version. And then we did a sequel on the Commodore 64, the Cosmic Causeway. I mean, we were very prolific, and Sean in particular, he was a very fast programmer. He could knock out a game in a couple of weeks, which he had to really, because the sales were microscopic, and within a week or two, the games were being pirated, so there wasn't a lot of money to be made.
Well, I do remember the version of Kikstart on the Commodore 16 was, I think recently actually kind of got a homebrew port to the Commodore 64 because it was very different to the 64 version. But it was actually, a lot of people regarded it as being a better game. I mean, was the 16 and Plus 4 quite a hard platform to develop for compared to like the 64 and other more
it didn't have the sprites, I remember, so you had to go about it in a different way. And I think we did a different style of game because of the technical differences. And then we did try to do a more grown-up version of Kikstart on the Commodore 64, Super Scramble Simulator, which tried to take it in another direction again, and that appeared on the Amiga as well, but not such a big hit as Kikstart was.
Well, you did some racing games, Speed King and Formula One Simulator. Were they hard to do on such limited software? Hardware,
I didn't have a lot to do with Formula One Simulator. I think Sean just very quickly built up a few routines that he would use for racing games and platform games, and we'd sort of tend to do similar concepts. Obviously, the machines are fairly limited as well. How much you could do with them. So we fairly quickly we were pushing them to their limit, and it was down to imagination of what sort of ideas you could come up with.
Well, originally Mr. Chip self-published their games.
In the very early days, yeah. That was actually slightly before my time. I think a lot of it was mail order. And then as the industry matured and bigger publishers appeared, some of those older games were republished by, I think, Mastertronic. And then, then we became. We very quickly moved out of publishing. I think Mr. Chip Software pretty much ceased self-publishing when I joined.
Well, what was the relationship with Mastertronic like?
It was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, we worked with them for years. I can't remember why we actually stopped. Probably, I think we wanted to do more ambitious games, bigger games. So yeah, I think it was just where we wanted to go with the project. In many ways, they started to get a bit too ambitious. So you couldn't really spend more than a year. When we got to the Amiga, if you spent more than a year, it was unlikely you were ever going to make any money out of it. And I think the last thing we did on the Amiga was Kid Chaos, and that took 2 years. And it was financially, it was just a disaster. So we're probably, in many ways, we were better off doing the very quick, a month, 6 weeks, through Mastertronic, get the games out quickly, make a little bit of money, move on quickly. That it wasn't such a, you were never going to get rich, but it wasn't such a bad model.
Well, Mastertronic were famous for the 199 range, weren't they? Which, kids could afford out their pocket money, which was one bonus, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, they could, but they would still pirate them anyway, because you can't really get cheaper than pirating games. So even at 199, you can imagine the royalty at a 199 game was almost insignificant. So even on a successful game, you'd make a few £1,000s. You'd have to have several games out in a year to make a reasonable income. I knew other people who were. They would do other things, so just doing the computer games wasn't enough to bring in an income.
Well, would you have to kind of realise that a big percentage of your income, or a section of it's going to be taken away by piracy, especially with the Amiga? And
yeah, well, we just got used to it, really. So it became more and more of a problem. It was, in many ways, it was. I think you could probably argue it was what killed the Amiga. That when we did our last game. We got a small forward from Ocean, and there was never any royalties. It just died immediately. I think it was the day after release, someone sent us a pirated copy, and we knew that we were never going to make any money out of it. They would just spread, and no one was actually going to buy it.
That must have been pretty heartbreaking, though, I guess.
It was after 2 years, particularly with the case of Kid Chaos. It was a labour of love. I remember long days and evenings designing it. It was a huge game that took 4 discs, it was, which was massive. I think the most we'd done before that was 2 discs for Lotus 3, and this is 4 discs of work. And it was 2 years and working evenings on something that it was really well crafted. We put a huge amount of effort into it, and it did nothing financially. It was just a huge flop.
So I think that's one thing that, probably the more we think about it today, a lot of people that maybe did pirate games back in the day probably do feel guilty when they hear stories like, from people that were involved there and actually made a loss on it. But, you remember like kids coming to school in the day that, they discovered cassette-to-cassette copying was a thing, and it was like, whoa, as a kid, you just, like you said, nothing comes cheaper than doing it yourself in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think part of the problem, also, in some ways, I mean, I knew plenty of people who pirated games, it was difficult not to, but you tended to, I think, when you bought a game, you made more effort to play it and to treat it seriously, whereas when you had an endless supply of free games, sometimes you didn't really play them properly or look at them properly because there was very little value associated with them.
Well, you did mention a Super Scramble Simulator before, and that was your last 8-bit game that you released on those systems like the C64.
Right.
And it was quite similar to Kikstart in many ways. Why wasn't that not a Kikstart game? Why was it not part of the series?
I think we discussed it, but when I had lots of ideas for Kikstart 2, and a lot of them I realised weren't going to work really with the Kikstart 2 concept. One of the ideas behind Super Scramble, I used to play a game in the arcades called Super Locomotive, which had a top view. It was a way of having a kind of 3D in that you could see the side view and the top view together to give an extra dimension to the way the game played. And I thought that would work well with a bike game. So that's sort of where the idea came from. It was loosely based on the Super Locomotive arcade game. And there was lots of extra ideas I had for obstacles that I thought would work better with bigger graphics, and it was meant to be more of an accurate simulation and less of an arcade game. But the Commodore 64 version was okay, and the Amiga version was just pretty much a disaster. The programmer on that one became incredibly good at playing it, so set the difficulty levels ridiculously high, and no one could play it. So it went out, and that was a disaster.
Well, what was the transition to 16-bit like then after the 8-bit machines kind of faded away?
I'd made a partial transition in that I was as soon as we got an Amiga, which is probably a couple of years before we started producing games, I was already working on graphics and just playing around with it. So I got quite used to it, and I really wanted to design games on it. I think the first thing we did was I think it was a version of a 8-bit game, Roll Around. I think that's right. It was called Wrangler on the Amiga and the ST, and that was a transitional game where we upgraded it. And then I think the first proper game we did, I think, was Supercars. I think, and yeah, it was great. I mean, once we moved to that, it was I didn't really want to go back to working on a 8-bit anymore.
What graphics tools were you using at the time?
On the Amiga, it was D-Paint. On the Commodore 64, it was the Koala Pad.
Yeah, I mean, people probably couldn't have done their jobs without those bits of software back then, I guess.
No, they were fantastic, and it was very much you were designing with pixels. So when we eventually moved to things like Photoshop much later, it was a very different way of designing graphics. It was less about literally worrying about individual pixels, which particularly on the 8-bit was you designed in pixels and thought in pixels. And there was less of that on the Amiga, and then by the time we got to Photoshop, you just didn't view it like that. It was more like manipulating images and not worrying about pixels. There was a huge transition there from 8-bits through all the way over to Photoshop with the Amiga sort of in the middle.
Well, Supercars was a really great top-down racer. What was the kind of story of these games, and how did they come about?
Supercars, I mean, it's not an incredibly original idea. There were other top-down races. I think we almost released one on 8-bit. I think we half designed the graphics for it. That they're on a website somewhere, and then scrapped it. So there were a few top-down races. With that one, I had the idea of rather than just having the racing aspect, I wanted a bit more strategy. And it was part of the ideas were loosely taken from Ghostbusters on the Commodore 64, a game that I really enjoyed when I was in school. But I liked the way you could pick up little extra things, and so that's where the idea of weaponizing your car and adding different things to the car. So it became a little bit more of a trading game, expanded into a trading game, particularly as when we moved on to Supercars 2, we went even more in that direction.
From my memory, it seemed to have a car in there that looked a bit like a Alfa Romero SZ. Were they kind of based on like real car models, or were they? That
could be the case, yeah. And some people say what was another one that there was that I suppose they were loosely based on cars of the time. There was a Marauder, I think, was another concept car, and. Yeah, there was a few things in there. With the original version of Lotus actually had something that looked very much like a Porsche in it, so all the graphics were sort of based on a Porsche. And when we took it to Gremlin, it was more than half finished. That they had the Lotus license, so the car that looked very much like a Porsche and all the front end screens, they went and they were replaced with Lotuses.
Well, how did you team up with Gremlin then, and what was it like to work with them?
Let me see. I think the first game we did with them was Trailblazer. That was not long after I joined Mr. Chip. And then they put out Supercars. I think we went to them because we wanted to move into full-price games, and they were our best full-price publisher contact. So we automatically went to them with Supercars. I think Wrangler before Supercars was put out on a budget label. I forget which one now. But we definitely wanted to move into more ambitious, more quality games, bigger games that would take more time to produce. Yes, with Supercars, we took it to Gremlin, and that was the start of quite a long-lasting relationship. I think it was quite a few years we worked with Gremlin.
Well, there was often cameos in your games, like in Supercars 2, you had Nancy Allen from RoboCop. Were there any Easter eggs or cameos that you remember?
There was loads. We loved doing that. There was always hidden. I forget how many we had. That there was endless little. I think all the Lotus games had a hidden game. It was Pod, a new version of an 8-bit game we did. We did a 16-bit version of Pod, and included that. I think that was in the first or second Lotus. I think Duck Shoot, a Vic 20 game that we did, that was in one of the Lotus games, I think. There was hidden things in Supercars 1 and 2. I think you clicked on the sky. I think in the first Supercars, it told you about global warming. There was just all sorts of strange little things in there, cheats. We carried on that through with right through to the rally games. There was hidden cars in the rally games. Kid Chaos had you could play all the little end of level games as individual games in their own right. There was all sorts of cheats in there. Probably too many things for me to remember.
As a kid, though, it was amazing discovering those, or you'd read about them in like a friend's magazine, and you couldn't wait to get home and try it out.
Yeah, well, it became something we started doing it. We always enjoyed doing it, and we did it more and more because there was a certain schedule of you'd get your previews, maybe then a full preview, then the review, and it was a way of keeping the game in the magazines. So you'd do maps, and then you might do secret codes, and you just kept the game in the magazine by having all these extra things, and it was just fun because I used to enjoy it myself when I find hidden messages or hidden games. So it was definitely something we enjoyed doing.
Well, we've kind of teased on it a bit already, but we need to talk properly about Lotus now, because you think back to like the early 90s, they were the most infamous racing game series around at the time. And well, let's talk a bit about the first game, Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge. What was the original story of the game, and how did it come to be?
Well, I loved racing games. I played racing games in the arcade a lot. Again, it's not a massively original concept. That people have done that plenty of times before, and I'd enjoyed Pit Stop 2 on the Commodore 64 and played things Outrun or all the usual arcade games. So I wanted to do that type of game. And I had some ideas about how it would work and how it would play. And after Supercars, Sean wanted to do an arcade game, which I think I still have the graphics for somewhere. So I put the Lotus idea on the back burner, and then we worked on the shoot 'em up game. After about a month, it just didn't seem to feel right. It just didn't click. It wasn't going anywhere. So we went back to the Lotus idea, and Sean said if he could come up with a fast road routine that would run at on I think it was 50 frames, so it would be very smooth, very fast. If he could write a routine that did that, which would be the basis of the game, then we would do it. So he went away for the weekend and then came back, and he had this moving road. It was just a road that turned left, right, up, down. And that would then form the basis of the game. So we moved ahead with that. Then I think we spent about 9 months, I think it was, on the first one, and I think Gremlin got involved about halfway through. We took it to them when we had something playable with some graphics in there, and they loved it immediately. Told us that they just acquired a Lotus license, but were looking for something to do with it. Asked me if I'd change all the graphics, and yeah, that's sort of how it was born.
Well, how did they get the Lotus licensing? 'Cause that was quite a big score.
It was. I suppose it was quite ahead of the time to do that. Then I'm not sure what was involved or how they got it, but they had it already when we took what became Lotus. When we took it to them, they already had the license. I remember having the meeting with them and them liking the game, and then telling us about the license and. As I said, I put something that looked like a Porsche that wasn't really a Porsche because it wasn't official. But it was nice to have an official license we could use. It added a lot of prestige. Probably the only downside to it now is that the license has expired, so we get a lot of calls to put the game out again. And obviously, we can't do it without Lotus's permission. So that's one of the downsides of having that license. But it was a fantastic thing at the time, and it was really exciting to be working with Lotus. And we went to the factory and got involved with them quite heavily on the launches, and got to drive a Lotus, which at that age was really exciting. So yeah, it was a huge thing for me.
Well, did you get any extra peaks or anything, like free car?
No, fortunately not. I think one of the directors at Gremlin thought about getting a Lotus and LAN, and they offered a small discount, which she didn't bother with. So yeah, there was nothing. I think we got. In fact, they were actually quite tough with. We got very little. I had to go to a dealership in Liverpool to take photos. I think they sent us a brochure that had very few photos in. This is before the professionalism that you'd get now with something like Gran Turismo, where it's a completely different scenario. I don't think they really knew what they were doing with us or what we would produce. So a lot of the research I ended up buying back copies of Autocar and Car Magazine because there was no internet to do research. So I was desperate to find measurements and specs and details, and Lotus they were a bit vague. So it was a learning experience. It was the start of what became common licensing. It was the start of that. So no one really knew what they were doing. But I know that when they saw the original game and saw the sales, I think they started to realise what it was and what it could do for them. But probably much like Aston Martin with James Bond, going back to those days, no one really knows what's going to happen until after you've done it.
Well, I heard they even had an Amiga set up in their HQ, so like visitors could come in and play. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure they did. There was all sorts of things happening at the time. It was like I say, it was a learning curve for everyone. For them, they've obviously licensed endlessly since then. They've got their cars in PlayStation and Xbox games. So, it was a big thing at the time.
Well, the second game, Lotus 2, is often regarded as like the peak of the series. Did you intend that one to be more of an arcade-style gameplay than the original?
We didn't want to just recycle the same game, exactly the same playing experience. We wanted a different style of play, so it was more like an outrun type game, just to completely differentiate it from having fuel stops with pit stops. And people were divided. I think people tend to like that one because on the one play you've got the full screen as well. So I think possibly people preferred that. And then with the third one, we it was sort of a combination of both of the games. So it was Lotus 1 and Lotus 2 with a editor bolted on for creating your own tracks. So we always try to add something new, something different that they hadn't seen before, or some extra value. So there was a reason to buy the next version.
Well, Barry Leach had some fantastic music with it, a really pumping kind of soundtrack. And I remember he borrowed a sample from Yellows. Oh, yeah. What was he like to work with?
Everyone was great at Gremlin, yeah. I think I didn't have that much involvement on Lotus 2 with the music. It was more would give them a rough idea. There wasn't a very specific specification to what we wanted. We didn't particularly tell them. It was just more what they came up. They have a look at the game and come up with something. But with Lotus 3, I wanted a very specific intro on that. So I worked with a musician more closely on the third one, particularly for the introduction, and also with some of the in between screens. I wanted it to be a bit more tailored.
I remember a friend of mine at school, he had his dad had an Amstrad PC, and for some reason he thought it was better than an Amiga 500, and he had the PC speaker, the beepy thing inside. And I remember he came around my house, he heard that introduction music to Lotus 2, and his parents got him an Amiga the week after, so...
Yeah, the Amiga was, it was unbeatable. Like the Commodore 64 at the time, that was pretty much the best thing at the time, and the Amiga as well. The ST... We used to do ST versions, but we really didn't care about them. They were an afterthought because it was a much lesser machine.
Well, I remember Lotus 2 had sample speech in there as well, you'd have checkpoints and like yeehaws when you went
yeah,
on.
that was me.
Really?
That was me. I think I tried all sorts of different accents and versions of that. I think it was like a slightly American accent. I'm not sure where we got the idea for doing the speech, but it was something that we tried. I don't think we did it on the third one. It was just the second one.
Well, a really cool element that Lotus 2 had was the null modem cable, where you could basically link up two machines and kind of race on them together.
Yeah, again, ahead of its time, and what's become very commonplace. And we did try it in the offices, and it was a fantastic experience. And we heard about people doing it, taking computers around to their friend's house, and we did hear quite a few people did it, because at first we thought, who's going to bother with this? It's no one's going to do it. But it was a lot of fun if you made the effort.
Well, some competitors came around, like Jaguar XJ220. Did you kind of see these as rip-offs of Lotus?
I suppose it was. I mean, Lotus wasn't completely original. I don't think anything is. Everything's evolution. But that was a fairly blatant copy. And I remember reading the review, and I remember that it had they did something in it. I think it was the car stereo. So when we brought the car stereo back, I think in Lotus 3. And when that was reviewed, they said we'd ripped it off from Jaguar, whereas we actually had it in the first Lotus game, and they copied it from that. And for some reason, we left it out of the second one for probably memory reasons, and brought it back with a third one. And I remember reading a review of Jaguar saying, "No, we'd copied them," which was annoying, because clearly everything from the concept of the game to things like the fog and the nighttime driving, which are really quite groundbreaking ideas at the time. They were things that I tried out, and I had ideas for how to do fog, and got. I remember Sean animating them and seeing those ideas work when we put them together. All those ideas have been copied on Jaguar.
It was such a groundbreaking game, that second one, in terms of those kind of concepts. I mean, we did with Lotus 3. That was a final game in the series. I mean, technically it was more advanced, but I mean, what did you kind of want to do with that third title then? What was the thinking of it?
Well, we had lots of mixed opinions about which of the first two games was the best, so we thought we will have both games in one game, so you've got two different styles of play. And people had always said that they'd like to design tracks, and we did start doing a track editor where you would put together corners, and it started to progress in that way, that you'd have a 70-degree curve, then a straight for this long, and then a 90-degree turn left, and it very quickly, to me, it looked very, very boring. And I said, why don't we have an idea where we just describe the type of track you want with lots of sliders? So Sean had to think about that and came up with a way of that working. And in the end, it was meant to be another way of designing courses. In the end, we did away with the conventional design and just had the system that I think Gremlin came up with, the idea of REX, which is Racing Engineering Construction something or other, and that was the designer. So that added another aspect to the game. It was also very ambitious. The downside of that is it slowed down. It didn't run as fast as the first game did. But and we had the futuristic level with lasers, and it was sort of pulling out all the stops, trying to think of everything we possibly could at the time. I think after that, I think we felt like we'd used up all the ideas, and we pushed the technology as far as we could.
The third game didn't get as good a reception as the first two. Why do you think this was?
It didn't have the originality. We were recycling ideas, but people did just want more of the same. But it never had the impact because we were essentially covering the same ground in many ways, and there were fewer places to go with the ideas and what you could do, because Lotus 2 did introduce quite a lot of new ideas, like the fog of the nighttime, the weather, etc. And there was just a limit to how much you could do, how many ideas you could technically do. And I think we were just running out of ideas, and the machine was running out of power, and it was starting to run slowly. And it was worth one more version. It was still a big success, but it sold very well. I don't think it sold quite as well as the second one. I think at the time the second one was Gremlin's most successful game. In fact, I think possibly Lotus was at the time, but I definitely remember Lotus 2 at the time. It was hugely successful for them. It was their biggest seller ever. We jumping ahead a bit when we did the first of the rally games for Europress. Again, that was their biggest seller ever. I think when it was launched, it outsold every other product that they released that year.
Well, Lotus 3 also had a Lotus concept car in there, the M200.
That's right, yeah.
Do you remember the story there? And did they kind of keep you in the loop and give you like information on new cars?
We got very little information on it. I don't think I even saw the car. They just sent some. They had some photographs taken and sent them to me, and because it was quite closely based on the Elan, I sort of adapted what I had, and I think we pitched it somewhere between the Elan and the Esprit for performance, and tried to make it slightly unique in handling characteristics. It was just to try and add a little bit of extra value. We threw it in there just to add some interest.
Well, Kid Chaos was a fantastic game because I was an Amiga fan and I was constantly looking for that fast kind of Sonic-y platformer style game. Wiz and Liz did it, but Kid Chaos for me was just absolutely fantastic. Where did that come from, and how was it to be worked on?
It was obviously, as you say, Sonic style. It was to have that type of game on the Amiga, so a fast platform game. So it did borrow quite a lot from that and other similar platform games. So again, it wasn't the most original thing, but we just wanted to do a version of that type of game, the best we could do on the Amiga. We wanted to ideally to be the best platform game on the Amiga. That was the main idea behind it. Technically, it was a huge stretch. There's all sorts of little things in there that a lot of those platform games, they had very monochrome looking backdrops, and they were very limited color palettes. And the Mega Drive was a very colorful machine, and we tried to work out a way to make it as colorful as possible. So I had an idea for designing backdrops that I couldn't. They were so colorful that I couldn't even design them in deep paint, because I had to design them in two sections, and that the backdrops were technically in, I think it was 3 colors and a backdrop color, and we changed the colors on every raster line and gave the illusion that they were very big multicolored backdrops. And I think some of them were in over 100 colors, and I had to draw them in sections, in bands, and there was never more than 3 colors on one line. It was so difficult to draw that Sean wrote a special program for me that found random colors. So I would draw the mountains in one picture that would somehow connect to the second picture that had a field or something in it, and each section would be in maybe 32 colors, but there couldn't be more than 3 colors on one line. And occasionally I would accidentally add another color or 2 colors, and Sean did a program that would say which line the extra pixel was, and I would have to find the pixel and remove it, because you could only have 3 colors in the background. That was the limit of the technology, but it did give the illusion of these very, very colorful, rich environments, and the backdrops were very colorful, but there was actually only 3 colors there.
No wonder it took you 2 years to work on.
Yeah, it was a huge project. It was ridiculously ambitious and almost pointlessly big. For some reason, I had an idea of all the scenarios I wanted, and I probably should have just cut back and limited them, because each one was huge. There was 3 sections to each one. I think there's 6 scenarios. There's a playthrough on YouTube somewhere, and it was just huge. And when we eventually took it to Ocean, they thought we'd had a huge teamwork on it, and they couldn't believe it that 2 people had designed this massive game. And they actually thought it was. I remember at the time they actually thought we showed them a demo, and there's a large group of people. Everyone really liked it. We were very impressed, and someone said, well, it's great, but what will the ordinary Amiga version be like? And we said to them, that is the ordinary Amiga version. That's how impressive it was at the time.
Because I know before that, Gremlin did have a quite a successful game with Zool that was a platformer game that... Because I remember hearing the Zool music in Lotus 3, so I knew there was some kind of crossover there. But I did wonder why Gremlin didn't actually publish Kid Chaos and instead he went to Ocean. What was the story there?
Well, I think when we started Kid Chaos, they didn't have Zool, and we did expect to put it out with them. And I think we'd shown them demos. And then they came up with Zool around about the same time, and they decided that they were going to have one platform game. They were very different games, but they decided that they were just going to push one platform game. So we started talking to other people, and Ocean really liked it and offered a reasonable deal with an upfront that we were reasonably happy with, and we obviously expected to get royalties, but that, as I say, that never happened because of the piracy. And but yeah, it was mainly it didn't go out with Gremlin purely because of Zool.
Were there changes made to it because it was considered too violent?
Yeah, it was originally called Kid Vicious. A very early version of it had a little animal character. It was a mouse character, I think. I've got the sketches somewhere. And then it changed, and then we had to keep changing it because then there was a worry that there was a lot of news at the time about violence being a problem. So we had to try and tone it down a little bit, and the artwork changed at the last minute. So I had to redesign the title screen. It's all a bit vague now, but I do remember it went through a couple of changes, and there was. I don't know whether it was really a problem. I think there was a perception that there might be a problem because what was in the press at the time.
Yeah, because I think then, like 93, 94, that was when, like, Mortal Kombat was getting coverage, and it was the age ratings came in and everything, wasn't it? Yeah,
I mean, it was nothing like as violent as that. I mean, you attacked flowers with a big stick. And, it was it was relatively harmless stuff.
So did the demise of the Amiga affect you guys much in Magnetic Fields?
It was sad to see it go and realise that we weren't going to be doing anything with it anymore. And I was a bit unsure about the PC at the time because it was only just starting to become a reasonable games machine. The first rally game we did on it was... That was fairly new technology. I think we did a version of Supercars International.
Yeah,
we did. So we upgraded that. Did a version of that for the PC as a tester. I think that went out on a budget label. That might have been with Ocean. And then so it started to become clear that it was more of a games machine, but there was that transition where I wasn't sure whether it would ever be a games machine, and then you started to get the 3D cards and the sound cards, and it did have some. It never seemed. It never had. I don't know. It never had the same feel of the Amiga. It never seemed as fun. But yeah, I mean, obviously we did well with those games. It's really. Most of the money I made in the industry was from those games, so I can't really grumble.
Well, you did International Rally Championship on the PlayStation, and it was really good 3D for the time. How did you find moving into that 3D realm?
It took a bit of getting used to. It was just finding your feet and testing it, much like when I started on the Amiga. There was a lot of. It took the longest time to do the first game. The second game was a lot quicker, and then we went in the other direction again with the last of the rally games. And it took 2 years. There was the second one was very similar to the first, and it was done reasonably quickly. But then the third one took another massive leap, and even now that sort of still looks reasonable, I think. I always think of the first two as being very similar games, and the third one being a very different game.
Well, those graphics on the first one, I mean, comparing it to even something like Ridge Racer, it looked, like streets ahead.
Yeah, there was all sorts of tricks we used. Again, we'd always look for tricks like we did with Kid Chaos. We looked for tricks with how we could make the cars look like there was more polygons from clever colouring. And I remember the walls, we couldn't put tops on the walls, so we used a trick where we used a solid colour on the top of the wall, and then from most angles it looked like there was a top to the wall, whereas it was really embedded into the side. There was little little tricks that you slowly picked up, because there was, I can't remember how many polygons were allowed, but it was ridiculously few by today's standards. And so again, you had to be very clever. And the second one, I don't think there was anything significant really in the second one, but we made huge jumps in the way everything was done with the third one.
Well, Mobile One Rally Championship, was that your final game then that Magnetic Fields put out?
It was, yeah. We had an idea for another game which was similar, but probably more like Gran Turismo. It was quite an ambitious idea, and we actually had, without mentioning any manufacturers, we had pretty much agreed a license with someone. And it also had a Formula One connection that we were allowed to use. So it was going to be a very, very big game using all of this brand, all of their cars from going back to the, I think the 40s, right the way through to modern times, with a Formula One element. Very big and ambitious game. And what we budgeted it, how much it would cost, and it was all looking very optimistic, and we were going to move on to that. We started putting a team together for it, but for various reasons I won't go into, we had complications with magnetic fields and how we finished the third game, business contractual problems. So we set it up. We set up the next game under a new. We came up with a new company, Eugenesy. We called it, rather than magnetic fields. And the problem with that is when we went to people for funding and to tell them who we were, they knew who magnetic fields were, but they didn't know who Eugenesy were, and they couldn't understand the name change. So despite having pretty much agreed the license and having a good idea and having most of all the best people from the previous team and some of the people in mind, and we had everything planned, we just couldn't get the backing for it.
Yeah, that did seem a big shame because, you guys seemed to be on top form when, the mid to late 90s came around with those titles, and then it just kind of seemed like it all suddenly ended. I mean, did Magnetic Fields officially end, or...?
Sean and I went our own way, and it was complicated. That it was quite a big team that worked on the last rally game, and there was various differences with people, and we sort of formed a sub-team that Sean and I were obviously the basis of the team, and we had people that we liked, that we worked with, and there were problems with other people as part of that team, which was sort of thrown together, and as the game went on, we did what we could to try and get the game completed. It was a very difficult development, the third game, because at the time Europress were going through I think financial issues themselves, which put strains on us and made everything very difficult. So when we got to the end of it, there was problems within our team. Sean and I decided that we would we wanted to continue, and there was people we liked in the team and people we wouldn't use again that we didn't want to work with anymore. But there was contractual issues with the name and various legal problems that remained from doing the last game. So we just did a clean slate and started again. But because we didn't have the name, we built up quite a strong brand with magnetic fields. Everyone knew magnetic fields. It was why when we did the first rally game, I remember the producer, when we agreed to do it, he was saying he couldn't believe he had the team who did Lotus to do the game, and he was sure it would be great. But we didn't have that when we went on to another project. We were sort of saying we are magnetic fields, but we changed our name, and it made no sense to people. I think there was suspicion, and it just fell apart. But we didn't have the name, so that was probably the single most significant reason why we didn't do another game. We couldn't get anyone to back us with a different name.
Well, is it true you kind of let your fans distribute old games as long as they're not making any profit?
Nothing official, and we do look at possibly re-releasing games. We've a couple of times we've sold licenses. I think Kikstart was the only one that really people have talked about putting them out. We have sold some licenses, and then nothing's happened with them. I think Kikstart was the only one on the iPhone where someone did put that out, and I've seen Lotus running on the iPhone, but there's the obvious licensing problems with Lotus. But as long as they're not making a profit, we generally don't bother too much, because it's particularly with the much older games. So there's some really obscure things that I worked on, like Exadium on the C16, that you can play online, and it's quite nice to see those games live on, and it's unlikely they'll ever be commercially viable in any way. So as long as no one is making money out of them, we tend to look the other way. But it's possible. But we are approached from time to time about official versions and official licenses and packages people want to do for whether it's the iPhone or other platforms. So that could happen.
Oh, do you have any other plans to upgrade any of the classics, like maybe Kid Chaos HD or something?
Lotus HD would be good.
I do think about it quite often. I even think about bizarre ideas for Commodore 64 games. I have a lot of ideas now. I'm not really in the industry now, and I still think about it a lot. That's my mind still works in the same way, where I'm thinking ideas and concepts and what you could do on the Commodore 64, and how that very restrictive colour palette and technical spec, how that led to certain sorts of games and what you could do there. So I don't have the time, but I'd possibly be interested in overseeing something or doing versions of our games. And as I say, we are approached. It could still happen. Possibly Supercars is the most likely. There may be an update for that. I did see a 3D version of Supercars on Second Life. I saw videos of it on YouTube. So clearly there is a fan base there that wants to see these games develop in some ways. So we did think about doing official versions and upgrades, and it's time issues and whether or not there's a market there for it.
In terms of timing, I mean, look, the Commodore 64 Mini's just come out as well, hasn't it? So there is quite a resurgence of interest in that market.
Yeah, it's nice to see it live on, because it's a really important part of computer game history, particularly Britain's contribution to it in the Commodore 64 and the games that went out then, and the Amiga. That it's a really important part of computer games history. So I'm glad it lives on and people are still interested in playing those games. It's nice to still be involved, and who knows what might happen.
Well, are you and Sean still in touch, and what are you up to these days?
Yeah, we're still in touch. Sean still works in computers. I now run a property business, which is something I got into when I was still designing computer games. So I'm into a completely different business now.
Much more sensible business.
Well, that's debatable.
Well, Andrew, listen, we just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing the inside story about some of our all-time favourite games. It's been fascinating talking to you. So thanks for being our guest this week.
No problem. You're very welcome.